Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Nice you're here. Thanks for coming. Even if it's the last time slot, and we are shorter than the others, so we have to speed up so that all presentations and the discussion find their time. My name is Enrico. I'm kind of representing the whole organizing committee, which is Sara Scherr, eco-agriculture, Yupin Lin from Taiwan. Here, they are sitting. It's a merged session as well, so, and we had the idea for that session when I was with eco-agriculture last year, because this was a big topic. And then, why this session? We want to tackle that challenge of see how landscapes are performing in different ways. We want to have a broad view of the landscape, and we want to include different and often contradictory perspectives, and also address a variety of audiences. This could be stakeholders, local stakeholders, but also donors, for example, of certain projects. And then we want to track a variety of landscape elements and also understand the interaction of these landscapes. So for me, and this is kind of a personal thing, I want to use this monitoring and evaluation in a constructive manner. So usually monitoring and evaluation is seen in a negative way. Somebody's checking if you're doing things right, but I hope we can also use monitoring and evaluation in a positive way, so that people doing projects also can prove that they're doing good work. And I hope with this session we're coming closer to that. The questions we pose for that session are three. One is, how do these integrated landscape management initiatives perform? This is one part, and then also the landscape where they are working, and then how we can use these methods of monitoring and evaluation to create better outcomes. We have here a poster, and this has to do with this, with another event, with another conference. This is the Agroforestry Congress, which takes place in about a month in Montpellier. And we had the idea that we do some knowledge transfer, and we want to bring the insights from that session to a landscape session in the frame of agroforestry. So what I ask speakers of that session, that they think about this figure, and this figure will be, I hope so, if it makes sense for the speakers in the end, and for us all together, will be the main part of that poster that will be presented in that session. So this figure here has different dimensions. One is the evaluation goal. So I would like to know of the speakers the approach they are presenting. Is it formative, so is it to learn something, or is it summative for a benchmarking, let's say? Is it the point of reference? Is it local? Do we have values that we are comparing from a local context, or is it a more universal thing coming from UN regulations, for example? How is the data collection done? Is it on the ground, collaborative, or is it unilateral? It's not perhaps the perfect word. It means, do we use existing data? And do we integrate different sectors in this evaluation and monitoring? Or are we looking only at one sector? And then I hope to get something like that we have the different monitoring approaches, and each color represents then such a project, such a talk we're having here, and we get an overview of the whole session. And then let's see if that will work out in the end. This is the program. Every speaker has 7 minutes, and after each talk, the speaker is asked to put his approach into that figure. Here are markers, kind of at the end of each talk. And then after these 6 times 7 minutes, plus a little bit for drawing, we have a final discussion where I have some trigger questions to show afterwards. So I hope that makes sense for all of you. If there are no questions, I'm asking the first speaker Maria to step up, and I will open your presentation here. And you need the micro, I guess.
Oh, we are never used one of those.
And I sit down, and I have some cards for the timing, so I will try to inform you about the time.
Okay, great. Go? Good. So thank you so much for organizing this session. I think it's really interesting, and my contribution will be on integrated landscape management initiatives in Europe, some of their characteristics, the challenges they face, and maybe suggest even some ways forward towards their assessment. For those of you who are not familiar with this concept of integrated landscape management initiatives, they are all these initiatives that arise as a response from civil society or local administrations, NGOs, research institutions to address the problems of loss of landscape values, environmental degradation, loss of cultural heritage, and so on. So they take the form of strategies that foster sustainable development, nature conservation, sustainable tourism, and so on. And in order to qualify as integrated landscape management initiatives, there are some criteria they have to abide with. So, for example, they have to foster multifunctional landscapes, they have to involve intersectoral collaboration, the cooperation of multiple stakeholders, be highly participatory, and also be context-specific, so place-based. And I'm talking mostly about initiatives that work at a local or regional levels. So given their importance as actors for fostering sustainable development, they have triggered a lot of attention worldwide, and there have been many continental reviews of these initiatives to assess their current state and also their potential. So in cooperation with the agricultural partners, we conducted the European review, and that's what I'm going to show you now very briefly. So, well, just to show you a bit how the method was, we just collected initiatives through internet keyword searches, and then invited the representatives of these initiatives to a detailed online survey. And as you can see in the map, where we show the initiatives we collected and the ones that answered, we had quite a strong bias towards the west of Europe. So just very briefly, the things I want to highlight today is that these initiatives are very, very varied. So we gave them a list of aims that they may pursue, and what we found is that even though nature conservation and cultural heritage preservation are among the most common aims, those were always in combination with other aims. So each initiative selected a mean of 6 different aims, again highlighting on the one side their holistic approach to the territory, so this idea of integrated landscape management, and on the other side the great variety of initiatives I'm talking about. Also, when we look at the stakeholder groups that are taking part on these initiatives, in this case, we don't see like a most common stakeholder group, although maybe independent experts and professionals are more represented, or civil associations and so on. But what we see in common maybe is the lack of representation of very important actor groups such as farmers and producers associations and landowners, even though these initiatives carried out their activities in landscapes that are dominated by agricultural land. And then we were also interested in knowing what are these, the outcomes, these initiatives, what are the most successful aspects for these initiatives. And here we can actually identify some common patterns across all the initiatives that we surveyed. So we gave them a list of activities and a list of outcomes they obtained, and we see, as you can see in the plot, that at least 90% of the initiatives reported outcomes in increasing the support of the general public population for nature conservation, cultural heritage preservation, and integrated landscape management. And also, one of the common outcomes that they reported was the increased cooperation among different sectors and stakeholders. And then more specifically, they mention the improvement of recreational possibilities for local people and the promotion of natural and historical heritage and nature conservation. So, well, we also asked them about some of the problems they face. And here, again, there is not an overwhelming common response from the initiatives, but we identified two types of problems. So on the one hand, problems with lack of funding connected to problems of the time and the effort that needs to be put into finding some financial support, and also the problems of getting long-term support. And then the other group of problems will be more connected to the lack of legal and political support in the form of political shifts that threatens the permanency of the initiative's achievements, and also tight policies that somehow block the development of the activities of these initiatives. So to sum up a bit, these initiatives could, even though they are very heterogeneous, they could be seen as having a common role as agents of awareness raising by increasing the support of people for this integrated landscape management. Also as being triggers of local action, so most of these initiatives arise due to a local impulse, and also triggering multi-stakeholder cooperation, and also their role as learning hubs where different knowledge systems and experiences are brought together. And then when we think about common challenges, again, these problems of financial support and representation of key actors. Thank you. So trying to address one of the questions of this session, so how can these initiatives or the outcomes of these initiatives be assessed? Well, I think it may not make sense to come up with a general framework to assess the specific outcomes of these initiatives, because they act in such a variety of contexts. They have different ways of functioning, organization, different actors involved, different aims. But if we look at this common role as agents of awareness raising and learning hubs, and also at these common challenges, maybe we can try to find some common strategy in order to assess their performance in that regard. And this could also allow to address some of the main challenges they face, so they can, if we can prove that they are actually performing a key role in awareness raising, stakeholder cooperation, and so on, then maybe we can help and secure some public and private support, and also manage to identify and engage key stakeholders that are underrepresented. And I think I will leave it here. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We have time for one or two questions. Yes, you have it.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a slide about that. I cannot remember exactly, but I think was the aim of the initiatives, where you had one on support for nature and landscape and so on. One question regarding the protection of natural areas and biodiversity, and regarding the support for nature, the answer was high, and the protection of natural areas, the answer was low. So for me, it's more or less quite similar, and I'm wondering why they rate it so differently. Sorry. The question
Okay, yeah.
is regarding also the potential of distributing the knowledge of those people who you asked, like the number of the members of the initiative, so the size of the initiative, if you also take a look at this.
Okay, yes. So regarding the first question, so on the one side, I showed a plot with the aims of these initiatives, and they all, or most of them have as a name the protection of nature. But when we ask them about the outcomes that they actually achieve, I think here they are more constrained. So probably it's not so easy for them to be very successful in protecting areas and biodiversity and so on. And also those are outcomes that may need a bit of a longer term assessment in order to
to show the results. So I think that's why here we see that only 70% of the initiatives reported outcomes on protection status. And as for the size of initiatives and all this information, we also collected it, and it was included in the analysis, but we didn't find any correlation with other variables. So just that in general, they are very heterogeneous. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think we have to go on. Is it a very quick question? Very quick answer. And Susanna, you could already start something.
Just a question about these initiatives. I think it's really interesting. Wondering why there's low key actor participation in them, and also this lack of goals articulated for organic food production or whatever. So are these not interesting initiatives for landowners and farmers to participate in?
I don't have like the perfect answer to that. I could maybe think that in Europe at least, so these initiatives were very focused on cultural heritage and these aspects, which are very different for the initiatives that were collected and surveyed in other continents, where the focus was more on actually agricultural production and so on. So it's maybe both how we framed it and also the type of initiatives that we have in Europe. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Please, do I have to use this?
You don't have to.
I do, okay, I will. I'll just hold it. It doesn't clip to anything, so. Yeah, it's just, okay, I'll try. I tried that. It might stay. Okay, I'll give that a try. All right. So my name's Susanna. I'm here from University of British Columbia in Vancouver, and I'm a bit of an outlier in this section, so just relax and I'll take you on a journey about organic certification and sustainable agriculture in Canada. So first, I just want to give a bit of context, which is that organic agriculture, you may know, has been proposed and debated as a solution to food system sustainability challenges globally. There's also been immense growth in the organic sector, both in terms of acreage and in terms of the market value and consumer awareness of organics. In Canada currently, where my research is focused, 2.2% of farms are currently growing organic or in transition to organic. And the sector in Canada is currently valued at $5.4 billion. So some significance here in terms of practices, which is what I'm going to focus on. There have been a number of meta-analyses that have looked at basically the sustainability performance of organics across yield and biodiversity and soil health. And many of these meta-analyses have concluded that performance often depends on management practices used, or beneficial management practices, BMPs. At the same time, organic standards do not always guarantee sustainable management because the management practices themselves are not always required by standards and accompanying regulation. And finally, there's actually very little known about how organic farming is practiced in the field, on the farm, and what the businesses look like, especially at sort of the meso scale, the national scale within these jurisdictions. The other piece of context that I think matters for my rapid talk comes from a rich body of literature in sociology, which discusses the process of conventionalization of the organic sector. So it's essentially talking about the way that third-party certification and export focus and government regulation have allowed larger farms and firms that have a more industrial approach to organics to enter the organic market, driving out smaller producers, and often they have more of an input substitution model of organic agriculture, and so don't always use these beneficial management practices that have all these sustainability benefits. And they also often use very different labor practices. So sort of consider that in the background. So my question that I'm going to sort of start to answer here today with this data set that I have is, how does management on organic farms vary relative to non-organic farms in Canada? And I'm going to be answering that using this data from the Canadian Census of Agriculture, which is a representative data set of 115,000 farms in Canada, aggregated at a provincial and national scale, and includes field management, business characteristics, and a bunch of things.
So very quickly, beneficial management practices are hypothesized, that we hypothesized that there would be more BMP use on organic farms in Canada, but we're not really sure because of all this other literature. And with this data set, we saw very clearly that organic farms across farm sizes and across crop types use more beneficial management practices, simply. We also wanted to look at how input use was changing on organic farms over this time period. We have data from 2006 and 2016, and we hypothesized that probably input use would be increasing on organic farms. And we have data here on the proportion of area on which inputs are applied across a variety of products, and found that actually on organic farms, input use area is declining. So the overall area has declined across these, except for fungicides. There's a slight increase. Whereas for the same period, non-organic farms or conventional farms have increased the area, proportion of area on which inputs are being applied. So a very clear difference there. We also wanted to look at how farm size was changing, average farm size on organic farms, and we hypothesized that there would be an increase in average farm size because there's an increase in overall farm size happening because of consolidation and other factors. Actually, we saw for organic farms, farm size is decreasing over this time period. And this across farm size and crop type varies a little bit, but overall it's decreased, and there's not really a super clear pattern in those other variables. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about labor, because I think that labor is a very central component of agricultural systems, and it still blows me away that in our assessments of sustainable agriculture, we often ignore labor and we ignore farm workers. So there are very few variables that the Census of Agriculture collects on employment, but there are some. And so I wanted to look at labor intensiveness of these two sectors of agriculture, and we hypothesized that organic farms would be more labor intensive. Smaller farms tend to be more diverse. Organic farms are smaller on average. They also have a higher proportion of labor intensive commodities. And indeed, we saw that in terms of weeks of work per acre, the certified organic sector was more labor intensive than the non-organic sector. And this was very true of small farm size classes. Actually, both non-organic and organic small farms were much more labor intensive, mostly driven by the greenhouse sector. And then we also, quantity of jobs is one thing, or volume of work, but quality of jobs is also an area of research that I'm extremely interested in. And the only way we could get at that with this data set was looking at year-round to seasonal employment, year-round being a higher quality job than a seasonal or temporary job. So we hypothesized and expected that small and organic farms would provide more year-round employment. This is a plot of the ratio of year-round to seasonal employment. So it's kind of a weird measure. 1-to-1 ratio would be equal. All of these farm size classes show less than 1 relationship, so more seasonal to year-round employment, but still organic farms as a whole have more year-round employment, and small organic farms have the most year-round employment. And again, this is fairly driven by the greenhouse sector, but also the vegetable sector. And so some conclusions, implications, limitations. Overall, organic farms show more sustainable management patterns. I think that's quite significant because there's been really a dearth of data on actual management practices. With this data set, we don't see signs of this conventionalization in Canada, but there are some other, I didn't show this data here, but there are some signs of intensification of the sector and capitalization. So, it's kind of hard to make conclusions. And then, labor is extremely central to all agriculture, but more so to organic agriculture that has more of a dependence on labor relative to the non-organic sector. But these are still mostly seasonal and temporary jobs, and it's very important to say that the census doesn't collect any data on contract work, which is a huge proportion of the number of hours worked, especially in vegetable and fruit sectors. So those workers are still not captured. And then finally, just in terms of relevance for the session, I think that this census data is a limited monitoring tool, and I plan to triangulate this data with a number of other methods. So, and I want to acknowledge my supervisors, Naveen Ramankutty and Hannah Whitman, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Other questions? Yes, please.
Switching to organic or regenerative and then downsizing their business to find an optimum you notice that that was sometimes the case, or is the decrease?
I just don't know from this data. Yeah, and I mean, so this is the total farm area, so it's not even to do, I don't know if they would actually sell their farm and physically buy a new farm, or if that would just, they'd decrease their production area. But if it's the latter, it wouldn't be captured here, actually, unfortunately. But yeah, I'm really excited to figure out more. Is this because of many farmers exiting and different kinds of farmers coming in, or are farmers actually sort of transforming the way that they're doing their farming? It's not clear.
Hey, there are no other questions. Thank you very much.
Yeah, with the one with my name.
Now,
Good.
now we're starting with the poster. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Good. So I'm Louise Willemen. I'm here to present some of the work I've been doing with my students Trini and Ashford and Andy Nelson. And this presentation will be about how can we use spatial data to monitor landscape performance? Can we go for a space odyssey? Because that sounded cool. I want to start with this picture. I'm not sure if you can see it, but currently if you look up, there's like over 4,000 satellites orbiting the Earth, of which 2 are Landsat and 2 others are the Sentinel-2 satellites, and these are the 2 satellites I will be talking about in this talk. So we're talking about landscapes today, and landscapes are changing, and that's because we are interacting with our natural environments. Landscapes are also quite often pretty large areas and could be hard to access. And as I said, landscapes are changing, and so because we are interacting with them, but sometimes they're changing even faster because we try to change them by implementing interventions or the landscape initiatives. So that's when we're talking about landscapes. And if I talk about landscapes, I kind of like to use the concept of ecosystem services, because for me that's a term that nicely links human well-being with the environment. And I will show you how I conceptualize that for urban landscapes. You have people in the center here. And people's well-being in rural landscapes, they depend, of course, on agriculture, because that's the main sector in agricultural landscapes. And agriculture can be sold, products can be sold, and there's money coming in. Ecosystem services in the rural landscapes, they kind of like play a role in different ways. They actually contribute to the human well-being directly, because it's a pretty area to live in, or you can recreate, or you can get some shade whenever you need it. For agriculture, ecosystem services play a role because of fertilization of the soil or pollination. And sometimes ecosystem services actually have a market. Think of the carbon stocks, or maybe if you have a recreational area that is paid for. So ecosystem services in that sense are part of this socio-ecological system that is a landscape. So if I'm evaluating landscape performance, I like to talk about how these ecosystem services are performing within a landscape. So there are interventions one could implement that could actually try to either increase the number of ecosystem services in a landscape, or, because that's of course the role of agriculture, it's not only depending on ecosystem services, but it also has a very strong effect through like the pressure it has on the area. So other interventions could be the introduction of low impact farming practices. I will talk about a specific landscape in southern Africa. It's called the Baviaans Kloof. It's around 40,000 hectares large, and it's heavily degraded due to extensive, like this, here you see a lot of sheep walking around. They have degraded the whole area, but since 2006, different initiatives have started to restore the land.
So there has been some exclusion of the livestock or the replanting the area. And instead of like keeping the goats, people have shifted to a different farming system in which essential oils were grown. We've translated those interventions into what kind of impact those would have on ecosystem services together with the people in that landscape. So what we try to do is, did those interventions change the ecosystem services, the 6 ecosystem services that are there? And can we use spatial data to actually detect that change? So this is an image of, well, an example of a farm. You have a farm that still has goats and a farm without the goats. And if you look at the sentinel image, a simple NDVI, you can actually quite nicely see the difference in vegetation coming up. So what we did is we set out 32 plots in that landscape, and we measured, in each of those plots, we measured those 6 different ecosystem services. And as a next step, we tested 10 different sentinel indices together with spatial GIS data, if those could capture the ecosystem services that we measured in the field. So, and we added that to with some GIS data. We run those models a couple of times to find the best, the most robust model to do this. Using that, and these are the outcomes. I will just briefly show it to you, but what is important here is if you look at those R squares, that gives you an idea of how well our spatial information could capture the field measurements in that area. As erosion prevention is mostly related to cover, that's pretty high, and the climate regulation or the water regulation is a lower one because that's a bit less directly related to vegetation. And with those models, we could start looking at those different plots where the different interventions were implemented, and we could nicely compare what the differences were between the intervened and non-intervened sites. And we put for the different ecosystem services. I think the main message on this slide is that it doesn't make sense to revegetate if you keep your goats in, because you actually, this is what you see here, the ecosystem services actually has gone down compared to the non-intervened areas. But that's in space, that's comparing the different locations, but we could also look at, from the moment that the intervention has happened, can we see a change in pattern in greenness? So these are I think these are like 6 different locations. You can see how things have changed, and when the restoration happens, greenness goes up while the control plots stay lower. That's when you have animal exclusion, but for revegetation, we could see that our control site actually was not performing any better. We did something similar, like looking at seasonality. Did the season, the growing season of vegetation change? And turns out that the width of this curve is the growing season. So this is the baseline situation before restoration. If you restore, it gets a bit longer green, and if it's controlled, it's a bit more narrow. To come to my concluding slide, so this is a way of measuring landscape performance, but it really is only good if we're looking at the green at the cover, because what we're doing is we're looking at the Earth from above. For the first point, is it more summative or formative? I would say it's more like it's an observation. It's from above. It's probably on that end of the scale. Point of reference, because we could work with pairs, we compared restored with non-restored areas. It was a very local reference point. We were not comparing to SDGs. Unilateral collaborative, it was a satellite flying over. So it pretty much unilateral, though we used also stakeholder information to add some extra information on the type of restoration. And the sector integration, I found it a bit harder because, yes, we could look at several ecosystem services. We looked at 6, but they mostly related to the vegetation cover. So spiritual feelings or income or happiness cannot be captured with these types of data. That's it. through the whole decision-making process and the questions. No, not you, Willemen. Yeah, so those were the R squares that I showed you very briefly. So there was between 0.6 and 0.8, how much we could capture, 0.9 actually. So 90% of this field variation we could capture with our spatial data. For some, that went down to 60%.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
You ready to go?
Yes. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Kuang-Chung Lee from Taiwan. So I'm going to use a case study of the Eastern Rural Taiwan to illustrate participatory planning, monitoring for integrated landscape management. So this study is more about research for sustainability. And Taiwan's small mountainous island with large populations, and the population density is among the highest of the world. Therefore, there has been debates about which is more important, economic development or nature conservation. And in the last 2 decades, we especially learned from international instruments of landscape approaches, including IUCN's, UNESCO's, and CBD's Satoyama initiatives. And now we have better ideas of reconnecting nature, rural, urban areas of Taiwan. As you can see, there are mountain ranges across Taiwan, and in the central mountain ranges, there are many protected areas set up. And from the upper to downstreams, we have actually nature, rural, urban areas in session in another turns, and forest, river, village, sea in session. So the strategies is to protect nature areas and to revitalize rural and agricultural production areas, and to have a symbiotic exchange between rural and urban areas. And this idea also raised some research questions about how to tailor international concept and put into practice, and how to help local stakeholders to monitor progress with a set of landscape indicators. So here's the case study areas in the east coast of Taiwan. It's a watershed with 2 indigenous communities, one in the middle and the other in the downstream areas. And this sequence of forest, river, village, and sea of landscape and seascape are quite typical in east coast of Taiwan. And their livelihoods problems, although the landscape, seascape provide natural resources for local livelihoods, but between 2 indigenous communities, there has been conflict over common resources. It happens from time to time. And besides of 2 communities, there are 3 governmental institutions, and each have value priorities in terms of livelihoods, agricultural productions, and biodiversity conservation. And different sectors work with the different communities for different affairs in the past. So the solutions, developing a cross-sector, multi-stakeholder partnership for integrated planning and management. So since October 2016, a forest, river, village, sea, agriculture initiative was launched there, and methodology and framework. And this research employed collaborative planning theories for design and analyze the new institution capacity building, and also the threefold approach to the Satoyama initiative, especially the 5 key perspectives, are quite useful for the task planning. And also the UNUIS, the indicator of resilience system, is helpful for monitoring the process and outcome. And there are 20 indicators, 5 groups for researchers to work with local peoples to evaluate the current situations with the Likert scales from very high to very low. And we found the triple approach and the 5 groups of indicator meshes well with each others. So both useful for planning and monitoring. So results and discussions and the participation process of the case studies involve 5 steps. Detail of the information about the process can be found documented in the IPSI websites. The stage 1 was to launch the initiative. Stage 2 was to figure out the operational mechanism for the multi-stakeholder platform, including task force meetings and the multi-stakeholder platform meetings. And the 3 key governmental institutions convened the meetings in turn and shared the chairmanships. And the meeting was held in turn in 2 communities, and university plays the role of facilitators. These are pictures of this stage. And action planning was to figure out the action plan collectively for the initiative, including 5 strategies, 38 tasks, duration, and responsible organizations. And these are pictures of the stages. Implementations, with some adjustment, the 2 meetings went smoothly. And these are the pictures. Okay, the monitoring stage, in order to explore local people's opinion about the progress and outcome in a more direct and comprehensive way. So we employ UNUIS indicator system to work with the middle stream community. In 2011, in total, 5 task group workshop was held for local people to finish the 20 indicators and also revise the action plan. These are the meetings. And last year, we worked with the downstream communities. In total, 7 indicator workshop was held. Yes. So this is the outcome, the radar diagrams for individual evaluations. And this is the average assessment in terms of each indicators. The first community, the second communities. And this is the average assessment in terms of the 5 groups. So conclusions and suggestions. So this initiative and platform actually help to build up new institutional capacity in terms of the intellectual capital, the social capitals, and the political capitals. And researchers find small working groups can be an effective way to explore a more in-depth understanding of local people's evaluation. And there are some potential risks and suggestions for the futures. And this is the self-evaluation of this case study approach for you. And there's a paper just published this month about another similar methodology and case study in Taiwan. Thank you for your attention. Yes.
Can you go back to the original yourself?
Go back to the. Oh, yes.
Or you can.
Yes.
There is time for a quick question.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
So, how did you have any issues with people being able to participate or express their views? Were there any inequalities or political differences as you're having these discussions? And if so, how did you deal with that? You're dealing with indigenous groups and local authorities, and it's not always the same
Yeah, trust is important. So it's very important to explain and listen to local people, and don't hurry to express my opinions, and also spend times. Therefore, I conduct many workshops, 5 workshops for A community and 7 workshops for B communities. Each workshop takes 2 hours time. So 20 indicators looks complicated and many, but if we can spend time, explain to local people, and they will decide this indicator is proper or not, and discuss the context of the local place in terms of each indicators, and then do the evaluations and ask local people to give the reason why they assess the high or low assessment, give the reasons. So the researchers is to listen to local people's opinions. And also this workshop gave opportunities for local community to listen to each other and also learn from others' opinions. So in the end, each community's local people, they appreciate these workshops, and they are expecting the next evaluation workshop maybe 2 or 3 years later. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Oh yes, sorry.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation. It is my honor to present to you a method that we developed together with eco-agriculture. Here are the authors of an approach to jointly assess landscape governance. Landscape governance we define as the system that's in place to take decisions in a landscape. And yeah, that is quite a difficult thing to talk about, to evaluate, and we developed a method to do that together with stakeholders. So what it does, in short, is that it gives us information about what are the key decision-making processes that happen in a landscape. It provides a space for dialogue between different actors, multiple actors in the landscape, to reflect on how decisions are taken in the landscape in a quantitative way and also in a qualitative way. And it allows to jointly identify opportunities to improve. The reason why we did it is not to collect information or to do science or to analyze, but it was done in the context of a program that we run with a number of partners that is about landscape governance, and it seemed like a logical starting point to find a way to assess what is the current condition of landscape governance in the landscapes where we work, in order to be able to do that at the end of the project again. But of course it generates some data as well, and you can make use of that. It's organized around 4 main groups of criteria. One that is about inclusive decision making. Another group of criteria around the culture of collaboration that exists in a landscape. A third one about coordination that exists between different sectors, between different levels of governance, between different actors. And the degree in which sustainable thinking is prevalent in the landscape. There are many different systems of evaluating landscape governance. If you want, you can identify 220 indicators and score all of them. Those methods exist. We have tried to cut down on them and limit it to 18. And yeah, it's based on expert opinion and analysis of what seems to be the most meaningful information. So to give an example, the inclusive decision-making criterion has 4 components, one about transparency, one about participation in decision-making processes, one about accountability of governments to local people, one about equity in decision making. Many of these concepts are rather abstract, and you don't easily discuss them with local people in a landscape. So that's why we developed the methods in which we trained facilitators to introduce it. We developed manuals, and we developed guiding questions that help people discuss these issues. So if we take the indicator of transparency as an example, we ask them to discuss, do they know how decisions are made at all in a landscape? Do they know whether anything is happening in a landscape, whether an oil palm plantation is coming or whether a logging concession is coming up? What are the barriers to access those information, and how well are decisions explained to people in a landscape? So those kind of questions we developed for each of the 18 indicators in the landscape. And then it follows a certain form. We have a discussion about these questions between all the people who are present in such a workshop. It takes the form of a workshop. I didn't say that. 2 days. And we asked them to score it. How happy they are about the way that particular indicator is being addressed in their landscape. But you need to provide a kind of level against which you judge the scoring. So we first asked them to, not at the indicator level, but at the criterion level, to envision what would be the ideal situation of governance in that landscape. And that is then the highest score that you can get. And then following that, there is an assessment where they rate the indicator. And they have a discussion about how things could change in the future, how it could improve. So this happens in the form of a 2-day workshop in which, it's designed for 25 people, but in practice many more often participate, drawn from a range of stakeholder groups, government, private sector, local communities, NGOs, men, women, of course, and it is facilitated. So we train the facilitators, and a local NGO takes it upon him or herself to organize that workshop and guide the people through the workshop. Of course, this is not, there are many different ways in which you could do it. Our program that I was talking about is about strengthening civil society capacities for lobbying and advocacy towards improved forested landscape governance. So that means that the choice we made is that many of the indicators had a civil society perspective, inclusion, participation, etc. Another choice that we made is that we know that all the landscapes where you work, they are totally different and different issues are at play. We wanted to provide a method that on the one hand was fixed, that allowed us to put a thermometer into the landscape and allow people to judge a given set of indicators in a very standardized way. On the other hand, we know that sometimes it's very difficult to talk about things like transparency, or it's very unusual for stakeholders to sit together, so we allowed also room for local variation in the way workshops were done. In some places, indigenous people were not consulted together with the government, because then they might not speak out. In other places, training was first provided to people who are not familiar with these concepts, so that they are prepared to talk about these things. The things that we do to standardize then is that we have a fixed set of criteria and indicators. We have trained facilitators, so the understanding of the concepts is similar. Understanding about what we want to reach with the workshops was similar. Many of the sessions were scripted because they are difficult ideas, so we have fixed or standardized text that we were used to create also this common understanding about ideas. And the scoring on a scale from 1 to 5 also helped to standardize. The flexibility then is in the qualitativeness, the qualitative approach that also existed. So we collected qualitative data, documented the discussions, as well as the quantitative data. And the format of the workshop was already... Okay. Okay, let me show them that we did it in all these places, in 18 different places, and it provides a lot of information that I can't discuss with you. But it was successful in stimulating dialogue and reflection. It really helps stakeholders to follow up on ideas generated there on a small scale, and it allowed us to detect, it will allow us to detect some trends in time across landscapes. Thank you. Let me switch you to the web page, then you can find the manual.
Thank you very much. You weren't that far from the end.
I wasn't that far from the end. What color is?
You can choose your favorite color.
Well, we use it mainly to learn. The main purpose was for stakeholders to think about landscape governance, so it is formative. The reference, the ideas, of course, are more or less universal about what's good governance, but many of the references were local, so maybe it's somewhere here. It's knowledge co-creation. We tried to make it as integrated as possible, but with 25 people, you can't cover all the sectors, and of course, there are always problems in getting private sector involved, etc. So it's probably also a bit here. But the idea is to have it here.
Great. Thank you very much. Is there a quick question?
Just quickly, the results of where you did it in all the countries, is that in the statistics report, or that is something that will be released later?
Yeah, there's a summary report published based on there are some, even though it's very problematic to compare between places, there are some patterns that you can see and that you can help you to pinpoint which indicators are particularly problematic or not.
Great, thank you very much. You have already the mic?
Yeah, I'm equipped. So now I will bring you to Laos, and I will tell you the story of a project that's involved in a transformative landscape approach. I keep this one. And the project name is EFICAS, for eco-friendly intensification and climate-resilient agricultural systems. And the big question we were asking ourselves when we were engaged in these transformative landscape approaches is, are we efficacious? In French is for efficient. And so I will summarize now in 6 minutes a 6-year project, trying to tackle those 3 questions that were introduced by Enrico at the beginning of the session. So how can we measure the processes, how can we measure the performances, and how can we measure how people learn on the way in those processes. So what we did was we spent almost 6 months in this area in 3 provinces of northern Laos, trying to collectively map the districts and then doing a participatory selection of a number of villages in those districts. And actually we selected pairs of villages with similar population, ethnic groups, history. And so we studied 12 pairs, so 2 pairs per district in 3 provinces, 2 districts per province. And we conducted a baseline in all 24 villages in 2014. And then we revisited the villages in the winter 2016 with the idea that the change that we would observe between the 2 times would be the result of our activities. And then we revisited last winter again, and then we will do this every 2 years for a long, long time, hopefully. And so this is what we do, what has been done in all the villages, all the 24 villages, is that people were engaged in a participatory planning, very similar to what was presented about Taiwan before, where we try to manage this trade-off between getting more money for the villagers and getting into natural resource management. And so from the current situation here, we envision together a future landscape, and then we develop a number of activities that would support the process of going from here to there. So for each compartment of the landscape, we propose a number of agroecology options. Can be agroforestry, NTFP, improvement, paddy with SRI, a number of organic processes so that were proposed in the intervention villages. And then every year, year after year, we renegotiate with the villagers the implementation of the plan. And so we experimenting things. Some work, some doesn't work. We adjust, we renegotiate, and we go to the next stage. Year after year, we try to go toward that common objective that we have developed. And then we try to measure those changes in both the control villages and in intervention villages. From individuals to the landscape, from you'll see, from remote sensing. And to do that, we decided that we will co-construct our indicators. So we start from well-known indicators in the literature, but we try to see what is the meaning for the local people of these indicators and try to ask questions that are meaningful at the local level. And so for each, here we are studying vulnerability, and we first try to identify locally what people felt they were the most vulnerable to, and then for each vulnerability aspect, try to list all the topics that would allow us to assess the level of vulnerability. We did the same on changes in agriculture, on land use systems, productivity, land use intensity, market integration, and around all those topics, we were asking very precise questions that people could actually respond because they were co-designed with them. And then the adaptation capacity. What we've done then is that we co-design as well the way we were asking questions. So if, for example, damage on crops, we were asking which pests provide the most, lead to the most damage, rank them, and then we rank the intensity of the damage on the crop. First years we use a paper questionnaire. Second time we use a digital tablet to go faster, avoid the errors in the process. Then we use remote sensing as well to analyze the changes in all those villages. We engage with the local people in analyzing soil. So this was done with the villagers around in their place. And then we try to analyze how people were learning on the way. So social learning was also important. And so what we did to learn ourselves about the process that we engage in terms of social learning, we developed games with them, and then we play the games. And then these are, once you get all the variables, everything, and you crunch the data, this is what remains at the end when you distillate all the information. And then this is the kind of spidergrams that we built based on this. This is the resilience framework from the theory. And this is what we get when we distillate the data at the local level. Then we can compare the situation in time, changes in time. You can compare control village with intervention village. You can compare the diversity of many villages in different provinces and then how they evolve. And then you can make this available on the website for other people to use. And here are my two take-home messages. One is that doing that, we monitor many things. We monitor our own activities, so it's a procedural monitoring. We monitor our own outputs, our maps, our plan, and so on, the quality of the concrete elements of our work. We monitor the quality of our interventions and the outcomes of our interventions in the process. And so the monitoring is an integral part of the transformative approach. Second thing is that when we are dealing with analyzing innovation processes and we are dealing with transformative landscape approaches, we cannot rely on what on many scientists have been using for many years, the adequation of a solution to a problem or how many beneficiaries adopt your solution. We're not in this kind of realm. We are in a learning realm, in a complex system, and so we really have to adapt our approaches to the kind of questions we address. And so this is where we locate ourselves in this process. On the lower part, the integrated aspects, now we are going more into nutrition, health aspects, while these were not addressed fully before. And so we tend to go to the left-hand side, but at this stage I left a little bit to the right because we can always do better. But some people who address less than us sometimes put themselves right to the left, but this is a kind of relative thing. You have to always poorer than someone else. It's a negotiation process. So we've been developing a method. It takes, as you presented, it takes several rounds of negotiation. Each negotiation, here we are doing one full week in the village, and we build trust. It takes time, and so first we do the village boundary. We develop a 3D model. You've seen the 3D model on the. So with paperboard, we cut the paperboard. We build the model. Then we invite neighboring villagers to check the village boundary. Then we locate the people on the 3D. I mean the situation of everyone on the 3D model, and then we play a game. We are dealing with shifting cultivators there. They know what they do, but they are not planners. They've never done this before. So we play a game before about the winners and the losers in the trade-off, so that they can learn how their individual action will modify the economics of the world, of the community, the economics and the environment for the whole community, giving some points. Then is one step. Many projects stop there. They say we have a plan, so people should use the plan, and that will be okay because they participated in it was a co-construction of the plan. And our observation after a few years doing the participatory land use planning is that this is not sufficient. People have to learn their way through. And so we have to support them in this learning process over a longer period. And the longest, the time we spend is highly rewarded. So the more you spend in the village and the most feedback and results and quality results we get. Please.
Yeah, thanks a lot for this fascinating presentation and the work you did there. Especially also that this idea of having a control village nearby is quite special. And I mean, what does that imply for the village that is controlled but not part of the positive movement? I mean, are there social, things going on due to that?
I'm used to that question. Yeah, this is even our partners, our national partners, hesitated at the beginning. Why should this village be the control? I mean, this is the loser, and this is the winner. They got everything, and the other got nothing. But for us, as we engage the whole community into the transformation, and we need a control, it's not possible to do within the village. So we need to have another village. So at the beginning, we consider all the villagers before we selected which one was controlled. And then it was at random, we decided which one was controlled and which one was not. And then they can influence each other. But we know also that all those villagers are surveyed very often. They are censuses. They are people who come to collect data. And so we come to those villages to collect data like any other group. And we're not supposed to pay for that or to engage with them in transformative approaches. Well, of course, in the other one, we do. And now the process is to simplify. This was a research tool, and now the process we engage in is to simplify all this once it's validated so that we can apply on many other villages and contexts.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I mean, we have some 45 seconds left. These are the guiding questions I had for our discussion. We cannot go through them, but if you have inputs, these would be very helpful because I will try to wrap that up and design a nice poster for the Agroforestry Congress, having some input, some ideas from your side included there. And if you have ideas, any thoughts about these questions, I would be very happy to hear them, of course. Otherwise, I thank you very much. You were attending that session. There was a thought before. Yubin Lin, he was suggesting, would you like to say it yourself?
Okay. This one,
you can have the mic and then you can.
Thank you. So, thank you very much for all of your, very excellent study and presentation. I'm thinking that, most of you have very exciting results, and for me, and I'm many editor for some international journal. So I'm now proposing that it is possible that all of our attendees, let's organize a special issue for this section, and then to publish some your current results, and even not the research article, but also maybe like a perspective article or overview articles. And then I also would like to invite you to be guest editor of this special issue. Not just only for one journal, we can discuss about that. There are some potential journal. The first one is sustainability, which is now included in SCI and SSCI database. And I'm editor of the editor board member for this one. And the second one is environment. I'm serving as editor-in-chief for that journal, now including in ESCI, and then we we already submit our application to SCI database. Hopefully, next year the evaluation will be done, and so that could be the other option. And the other one may be relevant, but a little bit far away. I'm a social editor of environmental monitoring and assessment, and then we can think about that. Is there any opportunity we can organize a special issue for this section, and then you can invite all of your colleagues, to submit this one. But I would like to, someone would like to be volunteer to be the guest editor to organize this one. As a guest editor, you just write down a description of this special issue, and then you handle all of submission. You can evaluate, and then the journal will process the review process. Of course, the first two are open access journal, and so you may pay publication fee, but if you do review some articles, you will get a discount. But that's the first two, and then the third one, of course, we do not charge any kind of publication fee. Okay, so, and if you agree, I do serve as another editor-in-chief for EI journal. So then that's an open access and then no publication fee.
Let's say people who are interested are just gather here and then we can discuss.
Yeah, and then.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Then we can close here.